I'm Scott Beaulieu, Director of the Johnson Center for Political Economy here at Troy University and host of eConversations. On tonight's show, we have a very special guest, Doug French, president of the Ludwig von Mises Institute up in Auburn, Alabama, just up the road from us. He's here to talk about his center, his institute, some of the programs that they offer, the history of the institute, and how it might engage students, both here at Troy and around the state of Alabama. Doug, it's great to have you on the show tonight.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Ludwig von Mises Institute and just start with a little background. Who is Ludwig von Mises, and why do we need an institute named after him?
Well, Ludwig von Mises is really the champion of the Austrian School of Economics, certainly in the modern era. And the Institute was founded 30 years ago, 1982, by Llewellyn Rockwell. And so we're celebrating our 30th year. There's not a lot of organizations of this type that last that long. So it's very much a tribute to Lew Rockwell's work and to the ideas and the power of the ideas that free market economy is, and free market economics, and specifically Austrian economics, are really the key to prosperity. Mm-hmm. And so the Institute was founded under the idea of furthering the study of Austrian economics, which at one point was really just sound economics. And then when the Keynesians took over, the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, Austrian economics fell out of favor. And in 1982, it was high time that there was an organization created to bring the Austrian school back. And really, the Institute has been terribly successful in planting the seeds that have grown over and over, which I think a lot of people can see in the Ron Paul campaign, the campuses at George Mason, and actually the campus right here at Troy University. You can see Austrian seeds sprouting everywhere, and I think it has a great signal for what's to come in the future.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been noticing in recent years, in addition to the momentum behind Ron Paul's campaigns, is a renewed interest in Austrian economics because of the financial crisis of 2008. And the Austrian theory of crises has influenced some of your work and a lot of your writing. Are you noticing that at the Mises Institute too, that people are coming in saying, we want to, we don't believe that the direction that policy is headed in response to the crisis is an appropriate one, and Austrian economics is one of the only schools of thought that has an explanation for the crisis and also an answer for what to do afterwards? Are you finding that in a lot of the student engagement?
Well, that's certainly the case, and I think not only is it attracting students who are smart enough to sense that something is wrong out there, and that the Keynesian nonsense that they get taught on campus doesn't make any sense, and it's the reason that we're here now. But I tell people a lot, because I get asked about, well, is there anybody in Washington, D.C. that is following Austrian economics except, say, Ron Paul? Mm-hmm. Is it starting to take hold in Washington? I said, no, Washington isn't listening to us, but Wall Street is. Mm-hmm. We have a tremendous following on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that Wall Street is in the business of navigating this, what I would call a house of mirrors economy that the Fed has built. Mm-hmm. On these extraordinary low interest rates and this trying to micromanage the economy through monetary policy. They know it doesn't work. They know that it's not going to create prosperity, but just the opposite. But they have to make a living transversing this type of environment. So we have lots of fans on Wall Street. We have no fans in Washington. And then I'll tell you right there that the Austrian school is really the one that people should pay attention to.
It's alive and well, and it's maybe just a difference between people on Wall Street who have accountability and, like you said, have to pay the bills versus people in Washington, D.C. who are going to get paid either way in most cases.
If your fund does not make money, investors take their money away and go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Capital goes where it's treated best. Governments continually treat capital very, very poorly, mm-hmm. and oftentimes, because they have no other competition, they can continue to hold on to these very terrible ideas that have been proven wrong over and over. Although I would say that in South America, recently, places like Venezuela and Argentina, they seem to think that economics doesn't matter. They can take over oil companies and steal the capital and think that they're going to have prosperity, or that Chavez believes that he can create inflation on one hand, and if prices go up, he can just set price levels, and that somehow goods and services will appear on the shelves. He's found out that's not the case. And as I say, it's bad enough to teach that kind of thing at Yale and Harvard and places like that, but to inflict that kind of damage on your people. And that's honestly what's going on in some countries. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how you came to Austrian economics and your background and training. You were taught by someone who had a very big influence on me in my own thinking. I wasn't fortunate enough to ever meet him, Murray Rothbard. And Murray Rothbard, for our viewers, is one of the leading champions of Austrian economics in the 20th century, and also someone who carved out a lot of space for libertarian thought, and a developer of anarcho-capitalism, one of the first to be making the case for something that most people think is crazy. And he made it a legitimate argument that people had to grapple with. Can you tell us about what it was like being a student of his, and what kind of influence that's had over your career, which is now one committed to advancing Austrian economics?
Well, absolutely. I was tremendously lucky. I moved to Las Vegas in 1986. Happened to be the same year that Murray moved there, same year that Hans Hermann Hoppe moved there as well. I worked at a bank for a couple of years, decided that I wanted to pursue a master's in economics, took a couple classes. One day I was leafing through the catalog, saw EC 742, History of Economic Thought, Rothbard. Had no idea who he was. I asked one of my classmates about him. I said, "What do you think about me taking this class?" And the guy honestly said, "Don't do it. He's a kook. Why don't you take that class, private study, with another instructor?" Well, I was working during the day. I didn't want to mess with that. I went ahead and took Rothbard. And, well, shall we say the rest is history. I took 2 classes with him, wrote my thesis under him, and we became great friends. He was not only just an intellectual giant, but a wonderful guy to be around. He was described by one person as the best person on earth to have a martini with, and I have no doubt that's true. He was a walking bibliography. If you were writing a thesis, he would give you 15, 20 sources in every setting. Every lecture was just peppered with reading suggestions, and he would not only give you the book, but the publisher, the edition, and the year published. He had that kind of mind. He was just, he was incredibly brilliant, but just a wonderful, wonderful guy.
So you finished up a master's degree at UNLV and worked with Rothbard, and then went into the private sector from there?
Yeah, I stayed in banking. I was in the banking business in Las Vegas during the boom. Had written a thesis on early speculative bubbles, Tulip Mania, Mississippi Bubble, South Sea Bubble. And then ironically enough, after 2001, Bernanke or the Fed, I guess at that point Greenspan, stepped on the gas. Low interest rates spurred housing, and we had a tremendous housing boom in Las Vegas, and I was in the middle of it as a lender at a local bank. So not only had I written my thesis on this, I've participated, as a lender in this, and of course it all came crashing down in 2007, 2008.
Given your own background and understanding of bubbles historically, and then also your experience of having lived through a bubble in the early 2000s, do you have this concern now that we're once again stepping on the gas since 2008? And are there any signs that a bubble's developing in something, maybe in commodities or in some asset class that people aren't paying enough attention to?
I think there is definitely the biggest bubble in history in U.S. government debt. I think that the idea that the United States government can print as much money as they want and pay you in debt in that currency, and only pay you less than 2% interest over 10 years, 3-point-something% interest for 30 years, a matter of basis points for anything less, I think is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't seem to be absurd right now, but I think when history looks back on this period, they're going to call U.S. government debt the biggest bubble there's ever been. There's many bubbles in commodities here and there. There's many bubbles in the painting the other night that was auctioned, the Scream.
Yep.
We see little pockets of this here and there, but I think that when you look at a bubble, and one of the characteristics of a bubble is everybody views it as can't miss. It was can't miss in the mid-2000s. If you owned a home, it was always going to go up in value. You could borrow as much as you wanted to against it and be fine. We're in that same situation now with government debt. It's not going to go broke. There's no problem with it. It's always money good, and I think some people are going to be tremendously disappointed at the end of this.
The investment guru and friend of the Mises Institute, Jim Rogers, has come out saying there's very much like you, this huge bubble in treasuries. And I know in some of his comments he said, but what can you do about it? Because you can't really short, you don't want to be on the other side of a bet with the U.S. government. That's dangerous. Is there a way to protect against that if you're an investor? And then another question is, are there ways to stop these bubbles long term, to prevent the gas from steadily being applied?
Well, protecting yourself against government debt, I think that that's difficult. Obviously, I wouldn't necessarily hold treasuries, but I think people end up holding some amount of treasury exposure, even if they don't know that they do, if they're in money market mutual funds or if they're in some kind of bond funds. It's clear that Bernanke with 0% interest rates is trying to push people out the risk curve, get them out of bonds into equities and that sort of thing. But I always hate to give people advice for fear they might take it, but I think that there's been a couple of things that have always been money, and those things are gold and silver. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, they don't pay you anything to sit around and wait. But over time, as more and more money is created, they tend to hold their value, and that's what you're after. Mm-hmm. Savings used to be very easy in this country. You make $10, you spend $9, you save. You save the difference. And you put a little bit of money in when you retire, there's something there. But now the government continually eats away at it, and now suddenly we all have to be experts in financial markets. Most of us are not cut out for it. We're not cut out to pick out stocks and bonds and commodities, and it's making it very, very difficult for people, especially with the very real possibility that Social Security is going to go broke. Mm-hmm.
You've had the policy recommendation that a way to lay off of creating bubbles is to just take power away from the Fed. And I'm assuming, given what you've said about gold and silver, a gold standard would be one preferred outcome.
Right, that was your other question. I apologize for not getting to it, but I think that I'm not so much for a gold standard as letting the market decide what money is. Mm-hmm. And so is it gold, is it silver? Well, history would say that it is. Mm-hmm. The other issue is, do we really need a group of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Undergoing price-fixing mechanism in terms of interest rates? Mm-hmm. Fractionalized banking is another issue. A bank takes your $100 and they lend out 90 of it. And by doing that, through that mechanism, they create money. Mm-hmm. Money also can be destroyed through that mechanism when banks go bad. But for the most part, when it's working the way the Federal Reserve likes it, and when the Treasury likes it and the government likes it, banks expand the money supply through their commercial banking operations. That's why I don't think we have hyperinflation right now, as much as the Fed has increased its balance sheet, 3 times, 2.5, 3 times. The other side of that equation is that the commercial banking system is still licking its wounds off bad real estate loans and other problems they have, and now Dodd-Frank regulation. So those two are fighting together. While the Fed is trying to do all they can to be stimulative, the commercial banking sector is being anything but stimulative, and that's why we're kind of somewhat at a stalemate.
Let's turn back to the Mises Institute and what you're doing at the Institute now to advance these ideas and help people understand everything from financial crises to these important thinkers in Austrian economics who have developed this tradition of understanding business cycles and understanding economic theory. The Mises Institute amazes me for how much content is available if you just go to the site and want commentary on a current issue, or if you want one of the original texts. You guys have a huge library up, and I think that that's a resource that is invaluable to students and helps you grab students right away, kids who want more information at zero price. Right. What else are you all doing with your programs under your leadership to reach students, reach just ordinary folks as well who are interested in learning more about Austrian economics?
Well, as you mentioned, the primary tool I think to get people interested is the website. It's Mises.org. We have a tremendous amount of material, as you mentioned. But we also have a summer program called Mises University, and we bring in students from literally all over the world. It's a very intense week of instruction, very systematic instruction, very rigorous in Austrian economics. And we have a fellows program for those who are a little more advanced, probably graduate students, again, around the world. We get a number of applications. I think this year we're going to have 15, 16 on site. We have various what we call Mises Circle events around the country. And these are geared for students, number one, but also for just interested people who are trying to learn about economics and trying to grapple with the world around them, which is very, very complicated. So we've been on the road to Houston and Chicago and California and Colorado Springs and various places all over the country, having generally a one-day seminar, 5 or 6 speakers. They're very well attended, and people, it's a breath of fresh air for people. Because if they're used to watching CNBC or other financial programs or what they hear from the news, they're generally getting a Keynesian statist point of view of what the economy is. And what we have to say is that those policies don't work, they haven't worked, prove they don't work, and here are the kind of things you need to think about to try to navigate this very, very complicated world.
For those who are just getting introduced to the ideas, 18-year-olds who I'm teaching, or someone who just stumbles upon the Mises Institute on the webpage, what would be your recommended readings, like the first book that maybe they should take a look at in Austrian economics? And is there anyone on television or in the media who someone, say on Wall Street, could look at and say, this is a person who's articulating ideas that are consistent with Austrian thinking?
Well, I think the book that I always direct people to is Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. And I used it, I taught a class, adjunct, once upon a time, and I used that not as the primary text, but as an additional text. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful book that Henry Hazlitt wrote many, many years ago explaining economics. And in fact, H.L. Mencken said that Henry Hazlitt was the only economist who could actually write. Yeah. So if people think it's going to be some sort of dry text, it's not. It's a wonderful little book. That's the one I would start with. And then people need to probably go from there. And they can pick up some Murray Rothbard, What Has Government Done to Our Money? and things like that. And I think at that point, if you're hooked, you're interested, you'll sort of find your own way. I think on Wall Street, I think the guys who really, whether they say they're Austrian, most of them don't, but I think what those who have Austrian thinking are guys like Jim Grant, who writes Grant's Interest Rate Observer, Peter Schiff, who learned from his father, Erwin Schiff, and Mark Faber is a wonderful guy in the resource area, not necessarily on TV a lot, but you can find him, a guy named Rick Rule. These are Doug Casey. These are guys who definitely are very familiar with Austrian economics. They may not use those words, but when you listen to them talk, you know that they have an Austrian view of the world.
Let me ask you something about this renewed interest in Austrian economics and the excitement that seems to be buzzing in the movement now, in part because of the crisis, but in part because people are just so jaded by the standard tools being applied and not working, the Keynesian recipes to recovery that just have been shown again and again not to have a lot of empirical support. And then now we get to experience and live through it and see that there's nothing but just a much greater debt burden ahead for us. Is this renewed excitement kind of a counter-cyclical excitement? When things are going bad, that's when interest in Austrian economics picks up? And can it be sustained even as the economy recovers? Or is it something that people turn to a heterodox school when everything else has been tried and isn't working?
Well, I think you and I both hope that it can be continued, sure. Right?
Yep.
But I would say from the response we get for events that we have around the country, the worse that the stock market is doing, the better our attendance is.
Right.
And the better our book sales are. So right after the crash in 2008, S&P hits a low in March of 2009, I believe it was 666. And during that spring, that was when the Institute really had extraordinary attendance at a number of conferences that we had. As the stock market got better, things seemed to get better. I don't think they really did get better, but people equate, how the stock market is doing with how the economy is doing. I think that's wrong, but people do that. It has slowed interest a little bit, not necessarily interest, but slowed book sales and slowed attendance. So I think people they think with their wallet, and they see their 401k. Or their IRA statements, and they say, oh, well, maybe what Washington wasn't too bad. They bailed out the financial system, and boy, I hate those bankers, but hey, my 401k statement's doing pretty well. These Austrian guys are still preaching this doom and gloom. Maybe things aren't so bad. And I think that it's just the nature of people to have more of a short-term outlook. And unfortunately, that allows government to provide these short-term stimuluses, heavy doses of government, makes people feel better, provide some bread and circuses, and they feel better and not necessarily understand that the United States is a country has a debt situation that is probably cannot be repaired given the current leadership in Washington D.C. Won't be prepared, and we are definitely going to go the way of Europe, and but I don't think people want to. I don't think they want to grasp that. I don't think that their elected officials necessarily want to deal with that. So in answer to your question, yeah, when there is a shock, when there is a crash, we certainly have an uptick in our interest in our business, so to speak.
And to be clear about your commentary on leadership in Washington, it's not really a Democratic or Republican thing. It's a systemic thing, essentially, in terms of neither side wanting to really get aggressive with reform and controlling debt.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that people, you hear this all the time. I'm sure you hear it, and the audience hears it, where people want to see what happens in the election before they determine what's going to happen to the economy. And if one guy gets elected, it's going to be bad, and another guy gets elected, it's going to be good. Well, those guys probably don't run things. I think in the grand scheme of things, there's a bureaucratic class of thousands and thousands of people in government, from the local government, state level, to the federal government. Those are the people that control our lives day after day after day. And those are the ones that are weighing down this government. And whether one guy's in charge or another guy's in charge or whatever, it doesn't. Maybe it makes a difference at the margin, but it really doesn't. I don't think political solutions are what's going to turn this problem around, unfortunately. And that's why we focus on education. I think if we have enough people who are truly interested in economic affairs, it's going to be through that education, not the rah-rah of politics, that is truly going to make change.
You sound very much like an organization committed to the long run, which is something we like. We're focusing on educating 18-year-olds and hoping that they go off and do things that advance liberty and perhaps have careers in the private sector or in government that emphasize, the important role capitalism and economic freedom have played in our lives. It's not something that's going to be fixed with just a little small tweak in Washington right now.
I know that's what people want, but I know when we were talking a little while ago, and the idea that here in Troy, Alabama, you have this nucleus of free market instructors. And these instructors may be the last economics instruction that these students maybe the first and the last. And when they walk out of Troy and go on to their lives, whether they don't have to be teachers, maybe they're business people, maybe they're cops, maybe they're whatever, but they're going to remember a free market message instead of a Keynesian message or a Marxian message or what have you. That is going to change the world. And it's guys like you that are changing the world. It's not going to happen in this election cycle. It's not going to happen in the one after that. But you're truly making the world a better place. And if there were more Troy universities out there, we would see it happen that much faster. But it's happening faster than people think. And so you're to be commended. Troy University is to be commended. And we just get up every day trying to spread the message and knowing that it's education and the power of the ideas that are going to make this world a better place. And that's what we're after.
I can't think of a better note to end on. We'll take the commendation, and really appreciate you driving down the road to be here. And you have to come back. We have a barbecue place that
I can't wait.
Check out too.
Can't wait. It was wonderful today for catfish, and I can't wait come back for the barbecue.
Thanks again for visiting and for being on our show tonight. And thank you all for tuning in. Good night.